I heard today at home it was like 88 there.
Oh, wow.
So I think a lot of time was spent at the beach.
What a great crowd. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight.
You're in a kind of over there situation. But I'll look over.
We'll probably need a mic there.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Well, how many Chet and Bernie fans do we have here tonight? we were just talking. It's been 4 long years.
Since Sense and Sensibilities. Not my last adult book, but
right. You left those guys in quite a place, and it's so wonderful to have them back. Though let's give Peter / Spencer Quinn a nice warm welcome.
You mentioned the ending of Sense and Sensibility. So when I finished Sense and Sensibility, or when I was finishing, I already had this idea for a non-Chet and Bernie book that became published as The Right Side. Came out 2 years later, and it's much darker. Now, not that there isn't darkness in Chet and Bernie, but as you've probably noticed, in Chet Suffers and things like that, but he bounces back to his reset position pretty quickly, which is one of joy in living. Well, I'm not like that, by the way. I've copied him a little bit, which is kind of crazy. But The Right Side is much darker, period. And so I had this idea, and I wanted to write this book. So in my mind, I wasn't abandoning Sense and Sensibility. The Chet and Bernie series. I was just stepping away from it for a little while. So I thought, well, what I'll do, I'll have it end on, as you mentioned, a bit of a cliffhanger, where Bernie's been seriously hurt. And Bernie, okay, for people who don't know, Bernie is the detective, and Chet is the dog who tells the story, but he's not a talking dog. He's a narrating dog. As canine as I can make. So
quite the unreliable narrator sometimes too.
Oh yeah.
Well, in human terms,
he gets distracted.
He has other concerns. He has other concerns,
but that make total sense to him, and I think to the reader too after you read it. So I thought, well, so Bernie is in the hospital and in terrible shape, and in fact, the doctors and all humans have given up on him. But Chet is right by the bed, and I don't know exactly the exact words, I can't remember, but he senses a bit of vitality. It's not a pulse, it's not breathing, but he just senses a little something. And that was the second last sentence. So I thought, well, the readers will see that everything's cool in this book. So I guess the day the book came out, I started getting emails in all caps. What have you done to Bernie? Have you killed Bernie? And then this one came in over and over. What will Chet do without Bernie? Well, I puzzled over that because, they're both figments of my imagination. But I realized I made a terrible error, and so what we have now is Heart of Barkness, which picks up the thread after that.
You made us wait too long.
But I made you wait too long, and I get emails about that as well.
The promise was at that last book signing that Chet and Bernie, the next book was coming out, and that would explain what happened with Chet and Bernie, and we waited.
Yes, so you've waited. Yes. Look, I don't know what I can do. Okay, I will say this, that the next one is already finished, and will be out next year at this time. So, and then I got a piece. Well, could I just blab on for a second?
Sure.
Because my editor told me to say this tonight, and it hadn't even occurred to me. But she called me today to tell me that Heart of Barkness will be on the upcoming USA Today bestseller list. But it hadn't occurred to me to mention it because there's something wrong with my business sense. It just, that gene never. My grandfather had it, but it didn't come here. So there's that.
Just not a self-promoter, is what you're saying.
Not my Nana, his wife said, sometimes you've got to shine a light on yourself, Pete.
Well, and I didn't really give you any kind of formal introduction, but everybody knows you, obviously the Spencer Quinn books, but multiple awards, Edgar Award, Agatha Award, and lots of books as your name,
Peter Abrahams, yes.
And previous young adult and children's novels as well. And I guess this is a good kind of segue into this. I read somewhere, I think maybe on your website, that it was Tom Nolan who kind of sparked this new persona.
He got me to, okay, so Tom Nolan's a book reviewer,
Right.
you call him, but also an expert on Ross MacDonald. He wrote a great book on Ross MacDonald, and I'm sure you know that. But he before he went to he's at the Wall Street Journal now, but before, I guess he was freelance, and he was working for the LA Times, and I wrote a book called Oblivion, which is also about a private detective, but it's very different. It's a private detective who ends up getting kind of a terrible form of brain cancer in the middle of the case and can't remember anything about the case that he's actually solved, and he resolves it with his new personality to get a completely different result. Anyway, in that book, there's a dog called Buster who has a walk-on, a trot-on role, I guess you'd call it, and Tom Nolan loved the dog, and he just noticed that there have been dogs in many, not dogs that you see the world through their eyes, just dogs that appear. And he said something very nice about my dogs, that they're kind of like the best dogs. And so at that moment I thought to myself, you know, dogs may be something that I should do a little more. And then one day, not long after that, but my wife said to me, you should do something with dogs. And it just, you know, in some marriages, there's a lot of subterranean communication. Oh, and by the way, I want to point something out if you haven't learned it yet. Women are way better at that subterranean communication. You have to be very patient. But I knew, when she said that, I just knew that she was meaning from the point of view of the dog. And that's how the Chet and Bernie thing got started. It's funny in this business, you can, sometimes 6 months worth of work can happen in 30 seconds. I knew in 30 seconds after she said that I wanted to write a book from the point of view of a dog, that it was going to be the old tried and true form, mystery form, where the sidekick of the detective tells the story that goes back to Holmes and Watson.
Right. And
And then the most important thing, that this dog was not going to be a talking dog, not a human wrapped a dog, purely canine as I could make him. And all sorts of things happen when that happens, that I've never understood how to really tell you what they are until today, when on Twitter some conversation started up about Russian formalism, which is a literary theory going back to the turn of the 20th century, early 1900s, and a man named Victor Shklovsky, so some of these people were talking about this and mentioning that there's plenty of it in the Chet series. This thing. Now, okay, so I can now explain to you. So I looked it up on Wikipedia. Okay, I either could have pretended that I learned it in college and knew the whole thing and it was all planned, or I could look it up and be honest on Wikipedia. So it's called defamiliarization. I wrote the whole thing. Defamiliarization, or ostranenie. My Russian isn't that good. Defamiliarization is the artistic technique of presenting to audiences common things in an unfamiliar or strange way in order to enhance perception of the familiar. That's the core of Russian formalism, and it's what separates poetry from prose. So according to that definition, the Chet and Bernie mystery series is so far a 9-book series written in poetry. I was delighted to hear that.
Wouldn't it be great to see like a PhD thesis on like the study of Gogol and
Chet and Bernie.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh wait, no. I now, because of the way things work, crowd sourcing and Twitter and all that, I expect to see it within a year. Yes. Not written by me, but maybe someone here.
Well, it's funny, these are books that, it doesn't stretch to say these are books that make us feel good. I mean, they're life-affirming books in a lot of ways. And you see things, you get a lot of really great commentary on sort of the folly of human behavior from the dog's perspective and a lot of insights into, dogs just, they're just there, and they don't worry about the same things that we do. Obviously, they don't have crises of conscience or.
And
Tell
how
us
did
that.
you do that?
Yeah, how do you do that? And
Get into the
when you were,
mindset of dogs.
did Chet's voice kind of just come to you? How did you get into that?
Well, after my wife said this, you should do something with dogs. I did something with dogs immediately. I went over to my office. Hi, Gina. I went over to my office and because I wanted to see how it would work. And I wrote the first page of what became Doggone It, which is the first book in the series. And that voice was there. So I took that page over to the kitchen, and my wife read it, and we voted 2-0 that it worked. Well, if had the kids been home, we could have lost 4-2, and none of us would be here tonight. I certainly wouldn't have been. So, but the voice, I didn't work what you would think of as work. Mental, hard, 0. I did not. That the voice happened. See, isn't it good in a job when sometimes some of the job happens easily? Not all the job, and every job is tough in some way, but I mean, if some. So in other words, the voice of Chet I didn't have to struggle with. Had I had to struggle, the series would have run out of energy, because when a writer is really struggling, especially in a series, you must have read series where you loved the first one, the second one was pretty good, the third you read half. Well, it's because the motors just stop firing, right? And to push that up a hill, no matter how good your technique is, the soul of it is not going to be there. But I love writing this voice, so when I sit down, it just comes out. Now, not to say that there aren't really the plotting, things like that can be very, very difficult. But if the voice is there, you can carry on.
He's very, very much a sidekick in the real sense. He does. It's interesting to watch how people, the different ways that people respond to Chet versus the way they respond to Bernie. That's kind of a fun riff throughout the books.
Yes, yeah, that really is. I think Chet was very popular right from the get-go. In early reviews, Bernie was described once or twice as hapless, and I had never thought of him as hapless, really. He's, someone who doesn't fit into modern life very well, but that doesn't make you hapless. That can make you heroic in some ways, and I think as the series has progressed, more and more people see Bernie in that way. That would be nice.
Right. Well, he also has something that Bernie doesn't have, which is this amazing sense of smell that the dogs have, and that's very helpful in detective work, as we discover.
Yeah. Well, no, okay, so traditional cerebral, Agatha Christie style detective work is not something Chet can do. That's just off the table. But he's very good at smelling things and hearing things. So if Bernie maybe is questioning, some very smooth talking perp and not, seeing any problems, but Chet smells nervousness, you, the reader, are actually ahead of Bernie for a while. So Chet is an unreliable narrator, as you mentioned, Patrick, but at times he's the most reliable kind of narrator, and you're thinking, oh God, what if Bernie doesn't catch up? He's going to be in trouble. So it's actually a way of generating a bit of suspense.
I wanted to ask you too, I know you've talked about this before, but for the people who haven't heard it, they're set here in Arizona. In
Most of them, yeah.
Kind of alternate version of Arizona. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose, it's great that you chose our state, but tell us about that.
Well, I wrote a book called Their Wildest Dreams, Peter Abraham's book, about a former dad. It's actually about real estate development in Phoenix before the bust. Right?
Good crime story.
Yeah. But it ends up with one of the main characters is a former dancer who dreams of having her own studio, but she ends up stripping in because her husband did something in the real estate. Anyway, blah blah blah.
Classic
But
American story.
yes, classic American story. But it took place in Arizona, and I'd been here before, but I'd never really spent a lot of time. And I spent time then and fell in love with the state. So when it came time to write this, I wanted a place where there'd be a big urban area, but surrounded by vast wilderness for Chet. Okay, so I wanted both. So Chet thinks it's called the Valley. And in California, whenever I make it, they think it's their valley, but it isn't their valley. It's this valley. The word Phoenix never comes in. There is a suburb of Pottsdale that is mentioned, where Olivia Moon has her coffee shop and house of ill repute at the back. But so Chet doesn't even. But I think so it's Phoenix kind of with the size of it. But I would say the vibe is more of Tucson. And it never says Phoenix or Tucson. Neither of those words ever come into it. It's just the valley.
And they finally get to see Chet. Yeah.
Well, yes. Yes. You see a Chet. Yeah, a live dog who's a model who was selected. Right.
It's great. He lives up. Their house is on. Is it Mesquite Street?
They're on Mesquite Road. Yes,
Mesquite
Chet and
Road.
Bernie on Mesquite Road.
And they have a questionable neighbor named Hydrick, which I thought was pretty fun.
Yes, and you discover in book, I can't remember which one, that Heydrich collects Nazi memorabilia. Yes, these are little, of course there was Richard Heydrich, who was a famous Nazi who was assassinated in 1942. But these are little, tiny, wee little jokes that I put in for my own amusement. And you don't have to know about them, I hope, to enjoy it.
Well, as always, we can't give away too many spoilers, but I'm just about this particular book. But the plot is so terrific, and is such in many ways an quintessential Arizona story.
I think in many ways this is the most Arizona story of the ones. Well, I love country music, and I've written a lot of books, and in my office I have satellite radio, so I've listened to practically every channel. So there were years when I did opera, but for the past 15 or so years it's been country music, outlaw country and Willie's Roadhouse, pretty much. And I just, Harlan Howard, the famous Nashville producer, said that the secret of country music was 3 chords and the truth. And I thought, are anyone familiar with the term murder ballad? Is that? So, murder ballad is a form of country song that actually they come from, old Scottish, Irish folk tradition. Long Black Veil is a very good American example. And I thought, I'm going to write a book that's a murder ballad. It's going to use country music. So this book is about, okay, I'll give away the tiniest bit. After the first part that sometimes I read, and I hope you enjoy, which is Chet and Bernie getting back together, they go to this little seedy bar out in the desert, a dive bar, where this singer named Lottie Pilgrim, who wrote a famous song called How You Hung the Moon a long time ago that Bernie's parents danced to, and then she kind of disappeared. There she is, singing in front of 10 drums. And Bernie is very surprised to see that, because one of the things that this book actually is about the artistic life, but never mind. I snuck that in. So during the course of the book, they look into her background, and stuff happened down on the Mexican border, and there was a singer called Flaco. I just took that name because of Flaco Jimenez, the great accordion player. And so I stole Flaco. So now you see how I work. You can write the next book yourself. So, and something happened with this Flaco guy long ago. Anyway, it's crimes. It's a Ross McDonald kind of crime story in that sense. So during the course of the book, Lottie, falls in love with Chet, and she writes a song for Chet. And I wrote the lyrics for Song for Chet. And I have a friend in California who's this sound genius named Bob Edwards, who works at Skywalker Sound for George Lucas. But he's been in the music business too. And he said, what's Heart of BARKNESS going to be about? And I told him. He said, oh, did you write the lyrics for that song? I said, I did. He said, send me the lyrics. And I did. And he called me back and he said, a few days later, he said, do you want this to be a real song? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I know people. So, of course, I don't know people. So to make this briefer, Mitch Watt, did anyone ever see Leonard Cohen in concert, or Lyle Lovett maybe? Chances are the guitar player is Mitch Watkins, who's this brilliant Austin he's down in Austin, a producer, multi-stringed instrument player who, played for Leonard Cohen and Lyle Lovett, and I'd seen him, but I didn't know who he was. So Mitch wrote a tune. He and Bob co-produced it. Mitch plays some of the instruments. Gene Elder's the famous fiddle player who plays with George Strait, and whose work I've admired forever, plays the fiddle solo. And there's now a song for Chet. And if you add, not only that, Bob made a video. So if you go to YouTube and look up "Song for Chet," you will see this song with the lyrics that I wrote. But that's all I did. And then this video that's all about dogs and people that. Well, Chet's on Facebook and chetthedog.com, and we asked readers who were there to send videos of them and their dogs, and so it's all made up of reader submissions that Bob cut down into small little clips. So it's a lot of fun, and before I leave, I'm getting cowboy boots and I'm moving to Nashville in one of those big concha belt. My family's going to be very surprised.
Don't forget the hat.
It's funny because I was just thinking about, did you have a particular Lottie Pilgrim, as you say, this kind of fading star, country star, did you have a model in mind?
I didn't have a model in mind, but there sure are plenty. But I took the name Lottie because of Dottie West, just to give you the era, that's all. But I made her up, but she comes out of real stuff.
It's funny because I have a vinyl record of the country sort of rockabilly singer Wanda Jackson from the 60s.
Sure.
But it was recorded here in Phoenix at Mr. Lucky's, which was a very venerable old. The building's still there, amazingly. And I keep waiting for someone to go in and bring it back to life.
Wow, what a great idea.
All the greats have played there.
Yeah.
And there was a place on the river bottom that somebody might know about, the Waylon Jennings owned for a long time here in town. Does anybody know the name of that place? But it was a dive, and I was thinking, wow, this is really all this is really kind of coming full circle.
Well, certainly Wanda Jackson. And she's still alive and performing and still great. This is a woman who went out with Elvis Presley, right? And it's pretty cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I did want to ask you a little bit, and we'll get back to this book. I wanted to tell us a little bit more about the right side, because you mentioned it briefly, but quite a departure in tone. I thought it was my favorite of your books, frankly. I thought it was a tremendous book.
Thank you.
Anybody read it?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's very well. It's the story of the right side is the story of a terribly wounded female vet coming home from Afghanistan, and her name's Leanne Hogan, and I mean she's just down in the depths, and it's actually kind of a road story in a way, and about 2/3 of the way through the book she meets a dog who's not at all a very unfriendly, a dog that's been ill-treated, mean kind of dog, and a kind of relationship is formed during this kind of road trip, wherein she actually sort of solves the mystery of what happened to her in Afghanistan, and also solves the mystery of what happened to the child of the woman she was in Walter Reed Hospital with. So it has mystery elements and road elements, but I really got deeply involved in this story, and one of the best things that happened was I began hearing from female vets, and I've heard from a lot of them, and they all really, really responded to it. So when you hear something like that, it's humbling. And now I'll move on to humbling part 2, because on this trip, it's something I haven't even digested, thought of. I don't even know why I'm telling you this. This is why I shouldn't be sent on the road, but
it's being recorded.
And it's being recorded. I was doing another appearance like this, and at the book signing part, this man, I noticed him because he very smart question about my methods and stuff. But so it was, you know, the lineup that came, and he wanted a picture with for his wife to take a picture of him and me. And so I started to get up, but he kind of, before I could, he sort of crouched down beside me, and we had a brief talk. We shook hands, and what he looked like was a kind of person who doesn't get much good press these days from certain parts of the country. He was a white man, you know, maybe 55 or so, you know, stockily built, big wrists, short gray hair. He looked like what I think he probably was, an ex-military oil company engineer, something like that. And he said to me, I want to thank you for these books, because for many years my father and I were estranged, and we came back together because of Chet and Bernie. And I said, what? And he said, well, yeah, a book group thing where we read and talk about Chet and Bernie. And I said, oh, where is this book group? Who's in it? And he said, oh, it's just me and him. We get together and we talk about and read Chet and Bernie, and it's brought us back together. Okay, I mean, a guy like, see, first of all, this is why you never take things at face value, including the human face, right? You just, because people have depth in them and nobility and stuff like that, if you just give them a chance, you know. And so this is that was, on this tour, that was one of the best things that ever happened in my whole career. Something like that. Something like that happened?
Turns out the guy's a florist, right?
I'd be shocked. No, there's no way. Okay, there's no way. Not that I have anything against florists. Oh, they're so important. You know, it's Valentine's Day in the morning of, and suddenly, you know, so you need florists.
Well, it's funny, we were talking back about cats as well. Anybody dog and cat lover? All right, there are a few of us. Borderline animal border. There's a great thing where I think Chet describes the smell of cat. It says, I'm better than you.
Thank you.
Tell us about your own dogs.
Well, yes, which two dogs. So Audrey is 14. She's a half Bernese, half golden. Just a wonderful, energetic watchdog, but gentle kind of. But you know, 14 is old for her, and so she's deaf now. But her sense of smell and is great, and her sense of vision is pretty good. And she's got some arthritis, but she can still. Okay, so and the other dog is Pearl. She's a 7-year-old golden retriever, in very good shape. So I described this office of mine. Like, there's the house, and then the office is over the garage. So I have a 15-foot commute, and so there's a couch in the office, and there are two ways to get in. One is through the garage, up the stairs, and then there are the other stairs that we had to build to satisfy the code, right? In the olden days, no one would have the outside stairs, but now you have to, because you got a second floor that you're putting in. So when I'm working, especially if it's like a rainy or cold day, they come up right away up the back stairs, and like there's no. Pearl makes a little sound, like a little which I don't hear. Audrey immediately claws on the door or the screen, which is now gone. So I let them in, and they lie down on the couch. And when they're tired of that, so they're helping me, right? They're there, and you know, they nap a lot, and it is kind of soothing. And so they're napping, and then when they get up to go, they won't go back out through the same venue that they came in. Pearl insists on going down the inside stairs, and Audrey goes down the outside stairs. I don't know why. But yeah, so they help me. So and of course, I couldn't have written this series without, these aren't the first dogs we had. But I couldn't have, there's just no way to, it's not that I did a whole lot of research and watched them with a notepad in my hand or videoed them. I just had dogs, right? And you pick up all these things. And all they want is, you know, to be treated pretty good and treats at all times.
In the new book, I guess you can hear me, but with Lottie, you had the opportunity to invent all of these songs for her, little snippets of
Yes.
songs, and some of them were memorable, like I think she had one called "Birthday in Prison" or something. What are some of the other B-sides?
Well, I had to, her famous song, How You Hung the Moon.
Right.
But now, what I wanted to do, my mom taught me most of what I know about writing, okay? But by the time I was 11 years old. I know it sounds amazing and incredible, I was so lucky. But one of the things she taught me is never try to make one of something do the work of two or three, like a word to do more, or a paragraph. Never have a paragraph that's just about tone or mood or character or plot. Make it about as much as you can. So these, of course, I enjoyed writing these little snippets of the song lyrics you mentioned, but I wanted there to be clues to the story planted in those that are dug up on quarter-inch tape, I think. So How You Hung the Moon, which is her big hit, the genesis of that becomes a clue in the story. Anyway, but I loved writing the little snippets, and now, so I got an email today from Gene Elders, the violin player, that George Strait with him, with Gene and the band, they're going to be at Gillette Stadium in August 17th, and he said, do you want comps to, okay, so it's not an intimate venue. This is where the Patriots play. I've been there once to see Tom Brady, right? And I think it took 2 hours to get out of the parking lot. But so now I've got this email from Gene Elders, come and be comped to see the band. The answer, of course, is yes, I'm going. But my foot is in the music business now. So with these little snippets, I'm going to have a look at it and see if I can complete one. Yeah. And I think it's going to be The Birthday of Prisoner.
Was it Birthday, not Christmas? It was Birthday.
It was Birthday.
Christmas.
Christmas in Prison is a John Prine song. Yeah. And a really good one.
Yeah, he's terrific.
Yeah.
Before we kind of open it up to questions, I want to ask you a little bit about your very early days as a writer. When did you publish your first novel, and kind of what other day gigs did you have over the years?
My first novel came out in 1980, so it seems like a while ago. Gigs. While I was in college and sometime afterward, I worked as a spear fisherman in the Bahamas, and so in some of my books there is a lot. I think the whole diving thing, and that comes up in a number, digging things up, all that, it had a huge effect on me. And after that, I worked just a little bit like in media, and then I was better at working by myself. And so I took some time off, I wrote my first book, which was called The Fury of Rachel Nanette, and it found a publisher, and that's all I've done. So I've written for children too, like I have a new kids series out from Scholastic, The Queenie and Arthur, which is alternating dog and cat narration in a little B&B in Vermont. This is middle grade, and I did another one for Scholastic, the Bowser and Birdie one also, which took place in Louisiana. But I've written I wrote the Echo Falls series under the Peter Abrahams name, which is about a 13-year-old detective named Ingrid. But I've written lots of standalone. I wrote 17, the way I taught myself how to do this, I wrote 17 standalones, which included The Fan, which was made into a movie with Robert De Niro, it was the crime fiction in the world of baseball, Oblivion, which I mentioned, End of Story, Revolution #9, a whole Lights Out, which was the first one, I think that was the fourth or fifth, and that's the first one where I figured out how to include thematic material. Because, okay, so there's a sort of totem pole of crime fiction, and at the top of the bestseller list often, but at the bottom of the pole, in my mind, is where it's just plot. Some plot meister who can it's one surprise after another, and believe me, that's real hard to do. So I admire it. But in terms of tone and mood and characterization, or thematic material, there's nothing. So, but as you climb up, you get deeper characterization and tone. But finally, how are you going to introduce? How's it going to be about something that just isn't about the darkness of the lonely detective? That there's going to be thematic material. And that was the book where I wanted to have it. And that's because I thought if you cross that border, then no one can say this isn't literary fiction. I don't want that term. I'm not admiring of it, but I don't want to be in a ghetto. And so if you cross that line into where thematic stuff is happening, and I believe it's even in the Chet and Bernie series, then no, you know, then you can
Russian
just
formalism.
yeah, the Russian formalism, of course. Yes. Okay. So this, thank you for that. And I think at Princeton and all those places that probably teach Russian formalism, this has to be on the syllabus. So all those kids, you know, juniors at Princeton and everywhere need to, you know, we're going to have to buy the Chet and Bernie series.
Well, if you don't mind, why don't you give us the kind of the opening chapter, if you wouldn't mind reading it, kind of.
A little bit, really? Is there time? Okay. Is there?
We've got some time.
Okay. All right. So this, I'll read the first scene, and that way you don't. It's kickstarted, so you don't need to. Right? I mean, you don't need to read it. You can just carry on. In fact, I had when I was a kid, I remember an English teacher we had who that's how she did the reading assignments for homework. She'd read a paragraph or two and get us started. And the thing is, when she read it, of course, with her timing and emphasis, you began to get it. It was great teaching, right? You knew kind of what was going on.
She made you want to continue too.
And she made you want to continue. Which is the whole thing. You know, if you keep putting the book down every 3 minutes, it's the writer failed. Red letter day, Chet, said Sergeant Rick Torres, our buddy at the Valley PD Missing Persons Department, in the car. Red letter day was a mystery to me, and maybe red is too. Bernie says I can't be trusted when it comes to red, something I've never understood. I knew fire hydrants were red, for example, knew that as well as I know my own name, which is Chet, in case you missed it, right up there off the jump. I also know in the car, and never need to be asked twice, or even once. Rick opened the passenger side door of the black and white. I hopped in, sat up nice and tall, totally alert, ready for anything. Was my tongue hanging out? Possibly. I got most of it stuffed back in. We have standards, me and Bernie. Just one of the reasons that Little Detective Agency is so successful, except for the finances part. It's called the Little Detective Agency on account of Bernie's last name being Little. But we're equal partners. Bernie handling the gunplay and the so therefores, and me bringing other things to the table. Maybe we'll get to my teeth a little later. Meanwhile, Rick stepped on the gas and we sped away from his place, where I'd been staying for what seemed like a long time. That was a worrisome thought. I tend to stay away from worrisome thoughts, like to spend my time in the here and now. At the moment in the here and now, we had the possibility of cat sightings, and also food trucks. We're pals with every food truck driver in the valley, me and Bernie. He says it's the best human invention since music. My choice would have been Slim Jim's. But if Bernie says music, then that's that. And the truth is, we're music lovers, big time. What's better than blasting across the desert in the Porsche, sound cranked up to the max? Roy Eldridge's trumpet on If You Were Mine, it does things to my ears you wouldn't believe. Maybe on account of your own ears, which are mostly about decoration. No offense. Rick glanced over at me. He has a thick and bushy mustache that sometimes catches a crumb or two. Once I made a sort of play for those crumbs. Perhaps not my best idea. No crumbs in evidence now, but I could always hope. And I always do. In a good mood, huh, big guy? Rick's eyes made one of those tiny shifts that means a human just had an idea. You sense what's happening somehow? Is that possible? What was this? Of course I sensed what was happening. We were going for a ride in Rick's squad car and would end up wherever we were headed. What could be more obvious? I gave him a careful look. Was he having problems at home? Not that I knew of. Surely that little incident with the steak tips couldn't still be on his mind. I was thinking about steak tips, not that little incident, more or less an accident and one of the happy kind, but steak tips in general when we pulled up in front of Valley Hospital. No surprise. Rick and I came to visit Bernie just about every day. First, he'd been in a special room where they put people who weren't doing so well. That whole problem was on account of what happened at the end of the stolen Saguaro case. A few confusing moments that had included the bad guys getting what they had coming to them, and then suddenly from out of nowhere, when it was all over, Bernie taking that horrible blow to the head. I tried not to think about how he'd fallen, so slowly, like he came oh so close to staying on his feet, except sometimes my mind would think about it anyway. But less and less, because after a while, Bernie had shifted to another room, not as special, and started moving around with a walker. A walker that happened to get me too excited. A small issue I was still working on when Bernie didn't need it anymore. Lately, we've been taking little strolls up and down the halls of the hospital. Was that in the cards today? I sprang out of the cruiser the instant Rick opened my door. And what was this? Bernie, not inside the hospital, but standing on the curb, duffel bag at his feet? Had I ever seen anything so wonderful? Chet, Rick said, or possibly shouted. Come back here. Sit. Stay. But I just couldn't. I flew across the parking lot. Yes, not touching the pavement or hardly, and jumped into Bernie's arms. Only remembering in midair that I'm 100 plus pounds. So that maybe this wasn't such a good, but it was, because Bernie caught me like he always did. Or maybe not quite exactly. What with a slight stagger and a loud grunt that someone who didn't know him better might have taken for a cry of pain. Oh my God, said Dr. Bethia, who I hadn't noticed standing there beside us, me sort of in Bernie's arms, giving his face a nice lick, and him laughing. What a lovely sound. Are you all right, she said. Couldn't be better, Bernie said, which was just what I wanted to hear. I eased myself back down and stood close to him, close as close can be. Whew, said the doc. But at least we know you're back to normal, if in fact you used to be able to catch Chet like that. Not every time, Bernie said. Dr. Bethia laughed, a surprisingly big laugh for such a small woman. Her glossy hair, curly and black, shook a little, giving off a smell like fresh rain. Normally, the doc had a nice treat for me, tucked away in one of the pockets of her white coat, but today she did not, as anyone, although probably not you, could tell from one tiny sniff. No worries, I still liked her just as much as before. No one's perfect, except Bernie, goes without mentioning. Right now, he was gazing down at her. I don't know what to say, he told her. He put his hand over his heart, then held it out. Thank you, Doc. Dr. Bethia smiled. They shook hands. Now that you're discharged, you can call me Eliza. Eliza, Bernie said. Their eyes met, then unmet, then met again. What was that all about? You're asking the wrong dude. So that's the beginning, and I think you see how, even if you hadn't read anything else in the series, you're ready to go. But if you read Sense and Sensibility and sent me an email in all caps, I hope you're happier.
Let's talk about the titles for a minute. I remember, in years past, you'd come and we'd always talk about them.
You suggested one yourself, didn't you? I'm trying to remember that we used, I'm pretty sure.
Was it The Sound in the Furry?
No, it wasn't The Sound in the Furry, but there was one. Or if you've always had excellent ones.
Yeah, well, you've done more Coney. You got For Fistful of Collars.
Yes, a fistful of, okay, so it's Doggone It, Thereby Hangs a Tale. I think that was my agent. Doggone It was a tennis buddy of mine. So my very first one I didn't, now I had titles that I submitted with all these. It was just, not Doggone It, because I submitted that, my friend's title. Thereby Hangs a Tale, To Fetch a Thief, I'm not sure who, that's the one with Peanut the elephant. The Dog Who Knew Too Much, not me. A Fistful of Collars, not me. The Sound of the Furry on Facebook, we just announced that it was going to be a Southern novel. Send in, and The Sound of the Furry one. Paw and Order, can't remember. Sense and Sensibility was me, and Heart of BARKNESS was me.
I'm sure you have big lists. What are some of the other chestnuts, or maybe ones that you would never use.
Oh, there are times that we would never. I think there was a dog on a hot tin roof. Came in also for Southern novels. There have been others. You know what I'll do? I'll go through. I do have them somewhere. I'll go and I'll put them all on Facebook. And anytime one occurs to you, send it in. Always looking.
And any place is fair game. Film, classic books.
Yeah, or just out of any kind of reference. That's right, exactly. Biblical, I don't.
So they'll be teaching your stuff in Faulkner classes now too, right? Along with
Yes.
Russian
No,
novels.
in fact, to get a decent degree in English now, there'll have to be a lot of reading of me.
Let's open it up to questions.
Yes. Any questions? Gina, yes.
Have your books been translated into other languages?
They have.
So what happens with some of the idioms that Chet doesn't understand? You know, like wild goose chase and things like that?
I don't know. I do know that sometimes I get emails from translators, like on idiomatic stuff. But what happens in general or in different languages, I really don't know. Because I think, for example, the series is in, or some of it is in Russia. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to email Vladimir Putin to say I had inside knowledge about XYZ, and I'll see, and I'll probably never be heard from again. Yeah. I don't know if he's a reader. He does. Of course, the Russians are great storytellers and have that proud tradition of just Dostoevsky. I mean, that was, in my mind, Crime and Punishment is the greatest crime fiction novel ever written, and there isn't another one that's even close. But I don't know if Vlad's read it or not. Because that we could form our relationship on the basis of that.
So there's got to be a Dostoevsky title.
Two men.
We've got to think of something.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Study on it.
Yeah.
The brothers Karamazov.
Yes. There you go. Okay, you've got the mind for this.
Pause off, 2 words. Yeah.
The brothers Karamazov. I love it. That's so quick. You're probably good at.
Dostoevsky.
Yeah, you're probably good at Jeopardy too. Were there other? Yes.
Yeah, did you have any kind of a problem with a publisher accepting, after all of your other novels like these, the books written from a point of view of a dog? Did anybody? I mean, was that a difficult sell?
Well, no. See, it wasn't a difficult. It was. My agent felt that was why we should use a pen name. That's how that happened. In Publishers Weekly in May, I wrote a whole piece about being trapped by my pen name, and it's a conversation I had in a parking lot where because I live in a fairly small town, and sometimes people say, "Are you still writing?" Because they just remember Peter Abrams, and they have. But I've written, like, if you include the children's novels under Spencer Quinn, there are probably 14 novels since then. So that inspired me to write this thing for Publishers Weekly. You can probably look it up online, but that's now everybody knows, and so I feel not like a schizophrenic anymore. Yes.
So how did you come up with the name Spencer Quinn?
I think it was my agent and my wife together, so I was assigned it. Like so many things, if you don't take charge, you don't get to make the choice. Yeah. But when I sign the books now, you'll see tonight it's always now Peter Abrahams, aka Spencer.
So it wasn't a nod to Robert B. Parker and what the other thing be? Quinn Medicine Woman.
Oh no! Yeah, Quinn. Yes, it was. That was the or Quinn the Eskimo, Bob Dylan, which is about Anthony Quinn. Actually, some movie that Anthony Quinn. These things are all. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
You've done a lot of short story ebooks. Are they ever going to be collected and published as a?
I think it's a good idea. In fact, there's a new one. Okay, for people who pre-ordered this book, there was a short story that I wrote called Upper Story that they got for free through the publisher, through Macmillan, which actually did a little bridge between Bernie in the Hospital and this, but I covered it here too. So there are 5 of them now, and I think that probably forms enough to have a little. Thank you. I'll say that here's what I'll do when I get back home. I'll email New York that there's urgent demand.
Arizona is demanding.
Yes, Arizona demand. We'll put west of
The valley.
Mississippi.
West of Mississippi.
Yeah. Were there others? Yes,
Are you
ma'am.
gonna do any more of the Bernie and Bowser series?
Not that I know of right now. I have another one of the Rough versus Fluff series, Queenie and Arthur, coming in September actually, called Pause versus Clause. So after that, I'll take stock on what I'm doing with the kids. I love writing for kids, by the way, because you get. Okay, shortly after my very first kids book came out, I got. Over the years, and if you go to peterabrams.com, I've written a little note to the kids to answer this question for them because they ask it in many ways, and I get handwritten letters. But here, I got an email early in my children's writing career that summed the whole thing up perfectly. I have to do a report on your book. Please tell me the story in your own words. So that happens, and you know you stumbled into the right career. Were there others? Anybody?
A kid asked you that?
Yes. The kind of kid who, it's like, so the thing I wrote on the website is, I know why you're here. Because if you can just corral one little fact about this assignment that comes from the writer of the book himself, you're going to get a good grade, even if you don't read the book and don't do another thing, because you've had the spunk to take the initiative and do this. So I know why they're there. So I write a whole thing where I wrote this whole thing on, I can't remember, but it's under the children's portion of my website, where I say I'm not going to help you, because I'm long past where I have to worry about if the train leaves the station at X and the bus leaves at Y. I don't worry about that anymore. But at the end, I give them a tiny little bit I sneak in a little.
Any film or TV adaptations being discussed?
I mean, there are always discussions, and the Chet series has been in development for a long time. Development is it's like a gulag where in Hollywood. I've been in it many times. So I've had a number of books that have been even gotten quite far along, but the only one that made it to the big screen was The Fan, which was a crime fiction novel that took place in the world of professional baseball. And there actually, so they shot the movie in Anaheim, at Anaheim Stadium. They shot some of the baseball at Anaheim Stadium, and Cal Ripken Jr. was the technical advisor. So I happened to be out there, not just because I have a lot of family, but I did go to the set and I met Cal Ripken. So he looked down at me. He's very big for a shortstop. Okay, shortstops when I played baseball were, but he said to me, he looked at me. He said, "How far did you go in baseball?" So I played in the 13 to 15-year-old league, which is called the Babe Ruth League often, but there's Pony, and so I confessed it, right? I wasn't going to say, well, I got into the low minors and then blew up my arm. I did. I said, 13 to 15. And he said, that's interesting because you got the baseball right, down to the littlest things about what we do and how we think about it. So that was a real, and it's one of those sort of things. So you float a little and you think, oh, okay, maybe I'll write another book. Because something happened. So even though I'm lousy at playing baseball, I still kind of, if I had a different body, I'd be good. That's what it is. That's all it was missing. So I came close. Actually, he was right. I came very close to the big time.
Did you absorb all the great baseball novels, the Natural?
I hadn't.
Shoeless Joe.
No, I tend. I've always scared. I've read some of them now, But if I'm going to write about something that I know there's stuff that's been done already, I stay strictly away from that stuff. Yeah, don't touch it.
Anybody else? Questions?
Sir.
Who do you read?
Well, as I just said, I don't read any crime fiction right now. I hardly ever do anymore. But I'm immersed right now in World War II. So people like Ian Kershaw I read, and there are a whole bunch of great. I think it's this. I don't think I can write about it in any way, but I think it's the biggest thing I think that ever happened in human history. Still not understood fully. Still having ramifications today, in my opinion. And an amazing drama with so many sub-dramas. I think that the interest in it will never cease. So that's what I read. But I still like when the quality of the prose is good. That's something that's really important.
Did you happen to catch that? Actually, everybody, that remarkable story from the D-Day, where there was like a 97-year-old guy that had parachuted in
Yes.
behind him, and he did it again.
Oh yes, and he did it again.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, all that reminds me of the Point du Hoc speech that Peggy Noonan wrote. I mean, that's on. Do you know about that? Oh, it's just it's on YouTube, and Ronald Reagan gave the speech, and he was really good at it. But it was during D-Day, these Rangers had to scale the cliffs at Point du Hoc, and the 40th anniversary, I guess, some of the surviving ones came, and so they were sitting on this promontory with Reagan facing the men. But in the shot, you don't really see them, and then behind them is the ocean and everything like that. And he describes what happened that day and what they did, and then he says, "These are the boys of Point du Hoc," and these gray-haired guys. I mean, tears, and what they did. Anyway. But it's a prose thing. It started as a speech. Someone sat down, they wrote a great thing.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, hey, why don't we break up and have you sign some books for us?
Happy to.
But please help me give them a nice warm.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me here, Patrick.
Always.
And conducting this interview
You
so
bet.
well.
You bet.
I appreciate it.
All right, so everybody, if you wouldn't mind folding up your chairs and just putting them against the closest wall, and then we'll have them here, right over here.
Thank you.